What a week, guys. What a reporting, actually, for Alibaba. As you can see, guys, Alibaba just cratered on the news of its earnings release. And I think largely that was a result of people really trimming their valuations as a result of the cloud coming down. And you can see that with articles coming out recently, where it looks like the analyst community has begun to cut targets on Alibaba as a result of the spinoff being ditched. But I actually don't think that the target cuts are a result of just the spinoff being ditched. I showed you guys in the last video, and if you haven't seen the last video, go back and watch it, where I was looking at the China commerce segment, and you see that China commerce is slowing down. That's something that these articles are missing, and that's very important because if you run rate the China commerce slowdown, then potentially China commerce grows at the low single digits or potentially even goes backwards compared to last year, depending on how the next 2 quarters roll out. And so there is something that's being missed here in all of these articles, but we noticed it in that video. And, that's why I described it in that video. So very, very challenging economics going forward. Hopefully things don't slow down as much as they could potentially slow down based on where this past quarter landed. And of course, Alibaba did go on to say that the new US export restrictions on chips are what is hurting their cloud computing business so much that it's canceled plans to spin off the division. And of course, that doesn't really make sense to me because it's not like you're selling the division, you're just spinning it off. So why would you not want to spin off the division? I guess potentially it might just be a going concern issue. They still need to have the business have access to the cash at Alibaba. So I guess that makes sense. But nonetheless, it's very disappointing, but it's also a little bit of a back and forth with what their plans were. And so it just explains to us or shows to us that, the things in the back office might just be a mess. It might just explain to us that they don't really have a sound strategy. They don't really have a 5-year view on the entity. And I guess that makes sense because, Daniel Zhang recently stepped down and now you have Eddie Wu, who's a CEO. So it's just a very challenging time for the company, and you're seeing that being reflected in the share price. But I just want to go a little bit deeper into this U.S. export restriction item. Now, I know a lot of us are familiar with the export restriction. What I was not familiar with is how the U.S. clamped down even further. What the U.S. did was essentially clamp down on workarounds, and essentially what the workaround was the Chinese companies could simply purchase a large number of smaller data center AI chips, which they could combine and build an equally powerful chip, I guess, as the restricted chips are. And so they tightened that, but they also tightened export of advanced chips to countries that are deemed to have a higher risk of letting the technology travel onward to China. So this is a bit of a cat and mouse game. And as time goes on, I'm assuming that more and more workarounds that individuals in China find will get addressed with more and more clampdowns by the US. And so this is challenging, but what it does is I think it has an unintended consequence. And this is something that we spoke about many times on this channel before. And you guys also have mentioned in the comments often. And what is that? I think what this inevitably does is that as the rules intensify, China's resolve to build alternative chips to US technology becomes higher and higher. And let's not sugarcoat this. All you need is one smart guy, one revolutionary person, and they could really take this to another level and make all Western chips look last generation. So be very careful as you tighten this stuff down. The Chinese officials are coming out and saying, look, it's one thing to address, military security, but it's another thing to clamp down economically. So you sort of have to be careful here. I don't know what the right answer is, but it definitely sounds like China has a greater resolve to build alternative chips to the US. Now, can they do it? Who knows? There's a huge infrastructure and there's, a 40-year head start. So I don't know if it's that easy to do. Alibaba does design chips, but of course, it's a whole thing. You need foundries, you need infrastructure, all that stuff. I don't know if China has all of that or they can, but the point is that they want it. And the question is, do they want it more than we want them to not have it? And that becomes the issue there. And I think this is an ongoing challenge. But ultimately, to Alibaba, this just means that their cloud offerings are just going to be less competitive. Can they work around this? Can they open up? Like, they are global, but so can they use data centers that are not located in China using the most up-to-date chips? I'm not really sure if they can even do that so long as the company's under Chinese control. And some of you guys had some interesting comments. So Christopher said, announcing the splitting of the company, and then Eddie Wu suddenly steps down. And you're not mentioning Eddie Wu. I think you meant to say Daniel Zhang. But, Daniel Zhang suddenly steps down, and now we're not splitting anymore. Their scapegoat is bad relations with the China and the US. Well, I guess it's more the clampdown of the chips. Which actually kind of makes sense to me. And so Christopher saying, I must not be the only one to find this string of events weird. Yeah, no, honestly, I think we all find it weird. It's just the market likes predictability. If a company's going to tell you what their 5-year plan is, they should follow through. And so he goes on to say, also, yeah, like some said, internal affairs must be hell in there. And yeah, I agree. I just think it just is a mess inside Alibaba right now. And now another Chris came on and said, Alibaba has never been the same company after Jack Ma gave that speech criticizing the Chinese government. Yeah, I remember he had to disappear for a while, maybe a couple of years. Other than playing options, I can't see any reason why anybody would purchase Alibaba. Well, I mean, the valuation is really low. It's under $80 per share. It's more likely that the shares would go higher than lower. However, that's not a guarantee, especially if China commerce continues to slow down. So would you want downside protection? I think so. And so what I'll do is I will give you guys a video talking about the options chain and just sort of what it looks like. Now, this one was just a really funny one. Elon Musk from Tesla clearly came on and said garbage. So I just had to give a shout out to that. That was hilarious. And FFO Obsessed, that's an awesome name, by the way. FFO Obsessed 40K. That's awesome. So he says that the dividend is a stupid decision. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's much more tax efficient to buy back shares. This quarter's net buyback is also poor. The management is a terrible capital allocator. Net cash is now $63 billion. So put it to good use for fudgesicles. And I think you're right. And, part of the reason why I think they were not buying back an intense amount of shares is because there was a little bit of uncertainty with the capital requirements for all of the 6 units that they were spinning off. But now that they may not necessarily be spinning off any of them, the question is, okay, now you really just have excess capital. So maybe it might be time to send some of that back to shareholders. I think step 1 is you start a small dividend. And step 2, you start buying back shares, which reduces the overall payout for that dividend to the point where you increase that dividend. A lot of companies do this strategy where they start off with a small dividend and then they just keep buying back shares and then eventually increase the dividend so that the total cash paid out annually remains the same, but the amount of cash per share increases because the number of shares decreases every year. And one great example of a company that does that is H&R Block. That's a name that a lot of the Patreons ended up purchasing. You guys did very well with that one. That one was a really fun one. It's just a boring, steady as she goes stock that I think a lot of you guys made around 30% on. So that was really nice to see. And then the last one, an OG of the channel, Superconductor, he said, time to sell some cash secured puts. Need to see what the options chain looks like in a few days. And so, it seems like a couple of you guys are waiting to see what the options chain looks like or waiting for me to analyze it. So in the next video, I will absolutely analyze the options chain for you guys. And so look out for that. That will come out today. And so I'll leave it there for you guys. Let me know what you think. How has your valuation of Alibaba changed? And more specifically, what I want to know from you guys is, what are your thoughts for China commerce over the next 2 quarters? Does it slow or does it overall grow at a rate of 7.5% year over year, which is what I was particularly forecasting it at. And I thought that was a lower type of forecast, a more conservative forecast. I tend to sit on the conservative side, but it might seem as though that might be high now based on the trajectory of China commerce. So I want to know what you guys think. And so let me know in the comments below. I'll respond to every one of you guys. All right. See you later, guys.